My name is Trinity. I am the Policy and Action Assistant here with SojoAction at Sojourners, and we are going to be having this conversation with two brothers, John and Samuel Munayer, and we are super excited to have them. This conversation will also be facilitated by SojoAction's own Cortnie Brooks, and we are super excited for this. And a little bit about our conversation people today. We have John Munayer, who is a Palestinian Christian from Jerusalem, who studied for his master's in theology and religious studies, interreligious studies at VU Amsterdam. Currently, he is an interfaith peace builder, a researcher, working in addressing religious tensions and conflict in his native land. He also has a forthcoming article with Sojourners in the next edition of our magazine, which is going to be called Christmas for the Oppressed, so definitely look out for that. And Samuel Munayer, who is a Palestinian theologian from Jerusalem, who holds both a BA in theology and philosophy and a master's in Middle Eastern politics. He's the advocacy and access officer for a humanitarian organization working in Palestine and also has authored several articles. So we have incredible people to be hearing from today. And of course, our own Cortnie Brooks.
This is John and Sam. They are the co-authors of The Cross and the Olive Tree, Cultivating Palestinian Theology Amid Gaza, which is a collection of works from other authors in the diaspora, as well as those living in Jerusalem. So first of all, I think, can you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves? Trinity did a good job about kind of telling us some of your things that you've done so far, but just so we could get to know you a little bit more personally, do you mind opening up a little bit?
So I'll start with myself, and perhaps Sam can continue. I'm a Palestinian Christian born and raised in Jerusalem. I also attended an Israeli Jewish school as a kid, and I think that interaction of being Palestinian Christian, being very in close proximity to our Palestinian Muslim brothers and sisters, but also attending an Israeli Jewish school, kind of influenced the way we engage in the reality here in Palestine and in theology. That's me in a nutshell.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Sam?
I'm the younger brother, in case anybody's wondering on live. You can tell by the hairline. Yeah, born and raised also in Jerusalem, of course, same house. And our origins actually come from the city of Elid, which is where St. George's mother is from and where St. George is buried. So our Palestinian indigeneity comes from that part of Palestine, and very much an important element within our theology and within our identity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's good to hear where you guys are from and some of the influences that have led you to this point in writing your book. So I have a list of questions, and I'm going to have to look at it because it's so long. But I think the first one is, I just want to ask about the book, because as I've been reading it, I just have gone through, so many emotions, reading all the different works. And we had Esmira on yesterday with a live, and she was able to tell a little bit about her chapter. But I guess, can you summarize for the people watching, what is this book about and how did it come to be?
So Sam and I write theology together as brothers, and we've been doing this for about 3 years now. And when the genocide began in Gaza, we had a completely different project in mind that was already in the making. But because the genocide happened, and it's still happening, we felt that we had to engage with it seriously theologically. And we said that we also couldn't do it alone, that this type of task needed to be done in community. And this is when we reached out to different Palestinian theologians, and we decided to create this project. And similar to sort of the name of the book, the cross and the olive tree, as we speak now, it's the olive harvest. And we try to sort of mimic the spirit of the olive harvest that is done in community, and therefore also theology should be done in community. So thankfully we had another 6 contributors who decided to contribute, and it also speaks to a new sort of phase within Palestinian theology, or a new wave within Palestinian theology. And it's, I think, the only book that also has an equal amount of men and women in it. So it's in many ways, I think it's trying to do something new.
Yeah, I was amazed at all the different perspectives that were in the book, ranging from like art to, grandmother theology, which I found really powerful. And then I guess a follow-up question would be, for some people who might not be familiar with liberation theology or even Palestinian liberation theology, can you kind of define both of those things and how Palestinian liberation theology is unique?
Sure. In a nutshell, because it's very complicated, and we can speak all day about this question.
Absolutely.
But Palestinian liberation theology, let's define it backwards. So what is theology? Theology is God talk, faith-seeking understanding. Some express it in that line. So anything to do with scripture, of revelation, of humanity, questions of faith. That's kind of theology. And liberation theology views the quest of faith and the quest of the task of theology within liberatory praxis, and therefore sees sin within systems and within structures. So interprets the gospel and interprets the faith as something that brings liberation today, now. And therefore these structures such as capitalism, white supremacy, Zionism are structures that are of sinfulness and therefore need to be revolted against. And also theology needs to be liberated itself. It needs to be with the preferential option for the poor or for the oppressed. So that's kind of theology, liberation theology, and Palestinian liberation theology follows that lines, but is within the context of Palestine. So it sees Zionism as a structure of sinfulness, and sees the theology of Zionism, both the Jewish and the Christian aspects of it, as something that needs to be liberated. And what's unique about Palestinian liberation theology compared to other liberation theologies is that Palestinian Christians are actually the minority within the land. We are a bit less than 2% from the river to the sea. So Palestinian liberation theology is very much interested in interreligious solidarity and interreligious dialogue. And because Palestine is the place of where a lot of the events of Christ and the Bible and the early church happened, it's extremely ecumenical. So as opposed to other forms of liberation theology, Palestinian liberation theology focuses a lot on in ecumenical relations and in conversations. And lastly, I'll say that Palestinian liberation theology is unique, and specifically now targeting like a North American audience that might be tuning in now, is that Palestinian liberation theology does not necessarily see the Book of Exodus as a primary source for inspiration for liberation, as opposed to Black liberation theology or Latin American liberation theology. Palestinian liberation theology, like Native American theology, sees its perspective from the indigenous, so from the Canaanites' perspectives, those who were genocided after that liberation from Egypt. So in that sense, Palestinian liberation theology is connected to liberation theology globally through its method and through its practice, but also differs very much contextually from kind of the mainstream liberation theologies that are more well known to a North American audience.
Awesome.
And if I can use the olive tree as a metaphor, think about it as the olive groves as the Palestinian context, the farmer as the Palestinian theologian, and the olive oil as the theology itself, which is supposed to be for nurturing, empowering, and healing the Palestinian people, and to provide a vision for both Muslim, Christians, and Jews.
Yeah, That's incredible. I was actually going to ask you about, the name of the book, because you mentioned, you kind of break that down in your introduction, why you have talked about olive oil and the olive trees and how it, and the soap that is created in Palestine. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why you've chosen this title for this?
So the metaphor that we use for Palestinian theology in order to introduce it is the Palestinian oil itself. Because me and Sam were trying to think about ways to introduce Palestinian theology in an indigenous way, and we were writing during the olive harvest a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought that olive oil can be a really great metaphor. So there's 3 different olive oils that we addressed. The first one is the olive oil of the church. If you go to Palestine, you will see priests anointing people with olive oil as a way to bless them or heal them. And it's also very common for farmers to bring, or just Palestinians themselves to bring, olive oil to the church to be blessed, right? So this is sort of the theology of the church, the theology that has nurtured people during difficult times of crisis and pain and suffering and genocide too. So that's sort of the theology of a lot of the clergy in the churches. The second theology, or olive oil, is the olive oil of soap. For those who might know that we use olive oil soap, it's one of the most oldest forms of soap, if not the oldest, and it's really healthy for you. So we use this idea of cleansing as thinking about academic theology, Palestinian academic theology. This is the theology that many people tend to know in the West, and this is the one that we use to push back or cleanse ourselves of colonial theology or Zionist theology or imperial theology. So that's the academic theology that we use and we are pretty well known for in many different circles. But the third olive oil, which we think is the olive oil that tends to be forgotten or not as appreciated, is the olive oil of the lamp. When you press olives to make olive oil, sometimes there's a certain amount of the oil that isn't the best quality and sometimes not the best for consumption, and therefore historically has been cheaper to purchase or to take, and therefore accessible to more people, which has then been used to light lamps in people's home. So this is the theology of the people. This is the theology that we see in our food, in the way we greet each other in Palestine, the way we are hospitable to each other. Or as you mentioned, there's an author, a brilliant author called Yusuf Khoury in the book, who speaks about grandma theology, or in Arabic, teta theology, right? The theology of our grandmothers, that in a time of genocide, it's not necessarily the theology we see in the churches or in academia that sustains people, but it's theology of the lamp, the people.
Yeah, I thought that was just a really powerful illustration, and very clear for me as a North American reader to be able to identify those things. And so I read that and was just really excited to continue on through the book. And just thinking about the contributors that you had in the book, it seems like you guys have built kind of a narrative for your reader, ending with your and Sam's article or chapter. How did you guys build on those chapters? Did you have something in mind? Was it intentional, or did it just kind of fall into place?
First, I'll say I see in the chat mentioning about abuelitas in Latin America, and actually that chapter called Teta Faith was inspired by the book Abuelita Faith. So you see already the transnational links. Just wanted to mention that because I saw that in the chat. John and I opened it up for the contributors to reflect on what it means to do theology amidst genocide. I think this book is a new moment in time in Palestinian theology, because there is a clear link and thread that runs through the book that was not in it just happened to be like that, and it shows you that there's a collective new orientation that is perhaps a mosaic of different voices within Palestine now, also in the diaspora, of new audiences and new targets and new methods of doing theology. So that really runs through. So John and I, when editing the book, we thought of positioning the different chapters. So that thread of transnational solidarity, of imagination, so decolonial futurities, and new ways and conversations that are not being addressed in Palestinian theology can be kind of given space for. And that's why you see that there's a clear kind of narrative of transnationalism, imagination, and envisioning a new way of doing Palestinian theology. And I just want to mention that John and I's introduction of using the metaphor of olive oil and olive trees for Palestinian theology is to push back against the notion that Palestinian theology is only a polemic criticizing Christian Zionism. We're much more than that. And we want to give voices for people and room for people who are not necessarily familiar with the debates about Christian Zionism and all of the kind of North American conversations you guys are having, but actually to draw on our own experiences and our own skins, our own family dynamics, to do a theology of liberation, a theology of one that sustains us during genocide. And that's something that has been a pleasure actually to be a witness of when editing the book, is that you can see a clear line and thread with the contributors. And I think that's exciting. I think this is something, there's a new theological terrain that is being explored, and it's not by an individual, it's by a collective of us coming from all places of Palestine, in and out. And this is where I think the conversation of building an alternative, not only critiquing is important to critique empire, but seeking to build an alternative future and doing it together, mimicking the olive harvest. This is where I am interested in being a part of a movement and doing theology that is fruitful.
Yeah. It seems like it's a family affair, because your father, Salim, is also part of, the Liberation Theologians. Your brother, Daniel, was also in the book and wrote a chapter. And then there's you two. Are there more people within your family writing about this? And then how did you guys decide that this is what you wanted to commit your life to?
Yeah, we are privileged enough to have parents who really supported us, but also nourished us spiritually and theologically. And I think this is true for me and Sam, but our other two siblings, Daniel and Jack, who are all engaged in one way or another in either liberation work, reconciliation work, humanitarian, human rights work. We believe that this is our calling as a family. To follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And, here in the Middle East, we do things as families. So why not also theology? And the book title is The Cross and the Olive Tree, which is also a wink towards James Cones's work, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And even in Cone's work, for those who are familiar with Black theology, his brother Cecil Cone also sort of was writing theology and engaged with James, and actually their engagement together allowed for Cone to grow in his theological work. So we kind of embody that, or as people might know in the Latin American context, the Buff brothers. I don't think we're near James or the Buff brothers by any means, but I think this idea of doing things as families is extremely important. And I think can bring a lot to the table.
It was great to see that. Yeah.
I like that Con always references his parents that have affirmed his humanity growing up. Being born and raised in Bearden, Arkansas, with Jim Crow and all of the white supremacy. They're the ones in the household that cultivated this love within the household that enabled him to really be proud of his identity. And it's truly a family affair. Like we begin with our grandmother and our grandfather who communicated to us our identity in the olive grove of our ancestors that was confiscated by the state of Israel. So our grandparents are there. And also the conversations that we have with our nephews. Our nephews also ask many questions that are theological and faithful, and because that's God talk. Everybody does God talk. You know, we do God talk around the table, around the dinner table when we pick olives. And I think it's important that we do things as a community and as a collective and as families. And that's sometimes it can be very messy. But I think really we need one another. And in Palestine, the family unit is really what's helping a lot of people to be resilient. So John and I want to communicate that, but also John and I specifically have always bounced ideas from one another. And in writing this book, we were brainstorming together, how should we speak about Palestinian theology in an indigenous way? And that's where the kind of idea of the olive harvest and olive oil came to be.
Yeah, it was your chapter and Daniel's chapter have very different themes, it feels like to me, where Daniel really explores his growing up and how it informs his idea of reconciliation and co-resistance. As he was writing that chapter, did he bounce ideas off of you for that? And then I don't want you to speak for him, but I mean, you are his brothers, so you'll be able to know, maybe his thought process. And that chapter really was challenging for me, especially as a North American, because our idea of co-resistance or reconciliation is really messy, and we don't necessarily know how to move forward with that. So can you explain that chapter a bit more, or tell us more about it?
Sure. Yeah. The word reconciliation and peace in Palestine, as it is in some contexts in other areas, is a dirty word. It's seen with suspicion in some circles. Whenever you say the word reconciliation, you have some people raising their eyebrows with suspicion, and rightfully so. Reconciliation and peace work in Palestine has been co-opted to pacify liberation efforts, to further sustain the status quo, to achieve a certain peace where people are holding hands and saying kumbaya and eating hummus, but not actually changing the structure of Zionism. And therefore reconciliation is seen, rightfully so, with suspicion. But what Daniel is trying to do in his chapter is reframe the conversation of reconciliation from coexistence to co-resistance. So in other words, in order to create authentic reconciliation as mandated in the Gospels and in like 2 Corinthians chapter 5, to reconcile new creation, we need to co-resist the structures that distort our relationships with one another. And in Palestine, that's Zionism. So where Palestinians and Israelis can co-resist together against Zionism. And he draws upon actually the book of Exodus, where the Hebrew underground slave movement and the Egyptian midwives co-resisted together against Pharaoh, or how Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector were both disciples of Jesus, and trying to kind of create a framework where reconciliation and liberation are actually part of the same work of restoring that kind of relationship. And also remembering that if we are going to do this kind of new creation work, reconciling and envisioning a reality, a future, an imagination of a future where there's redemption, being a Palestinian means that you're no longer a victim of Zionism. And being an Israeli Jew means that you're liberated from your identity as an oppressor. And therefore, there can be imagination work in terms of how to envision the actions today in co-resisting together.
Yeah, he draws a lot on Paulo Freire's work from Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I noticed, which is phenomenal. That's a book that I highly recommend for anyone who wants to understand liberation theology, especially under, this theme of education specifically. But Daniel really does a great job of kind of weaving Paulo's theories and observations of the world into his chapter. So I really appreciated that, because Paula was talking about the liberation of everyone, right? And so I really loved his chapter. I mean, I have so many questions. Again, this book was both really good to read, but really hard and challenging, I think, as it should be, especially as a North American. I live in Montana as well. We have a lot of native tribes here. I just went to a discussion with Chris Latre this week, who talked about his book Becoming Little Shell, and his process of learning his own identity and the North American Native American tribes' attachment to the land specifically, which I know with Palestinians, it's this tie to the land. Can you I guess discuss that a little bit more about how the land is such a huge part of your culture?
Yeah, Palestinian communities and societies have very much organized themselves in and through and with the land. And this is seen also in other places around the world. And what has happened with colonialism and specifically Zionism is distorting that relationship between the people and the land, and seeing it as something that needs to be sort of controlled or dominated. And I think a lot of the authors, but one of them in particular, Shadia Kupti, who actually brings into conversation some indigenous theology in Turtle Island and in Palestine together, is how can we also learn from the land itself? How can the land teach us? And this is why it was so important for us to have that name of the olive tree in our book, because we too need to be in the land when we write theology, and allow the land to communicate to us in a way that is also respectful and liberating of the land, the way we understand it, the way we're destroying it, and allow it to also give us spiritual fruit, if I can use that language.
Yeah. I want to get to your guys' chapter, because I think the book ends with your chapter, which is called Palestinian Theology of Martyrdom, which was just a really heavy but insightful chapter for me in particular, and what we're seeing in the United States with a lot of our racism and deportations and ICE. There's a lot of bearing witness, as you talk about in this chapter, and so I kind of want to I wanted to kind of spend the next couple of minutes maybe talking about that. Martyrdom is an interesting word for people. You mentioned that it's perceived differently for many people. Can you explain this idea of martyrdom from your chapter?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a loaded term. So John and I, in that chapter, articulate martyrdom as its definition in Greek and in Arabic, ancient Greek and Arabic, which means witness. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with death. So one can be a martyr not necessarily by getting killed or murdered for their witness, but is someone who commits themselves to witnessing to the plight of the oppressed and to the crucified God. And in that sense, the definition of martyrdom is much more nuanced than the classic Bishop Oscar Romero, Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X kind of. Although they're martyrs, and martyrdom, that suffering that usually when you do liberatory praxis, there is great suffering. There's a cost. So in that sense, we wanted to wrestle with what it actually means to carry the cross and follow Christ during a time of genocide, during a time for other people going through great suffering and oppression around the world, in a way that you're still being a witness, and who's being witnessed, and who's on trial, these kind of questions. How do we sustain our faith? And how do we cultivate a theology of martyrdom which is based on witness and not a theology of survival, which is a lot of where institutions and churches are seeking to save their own institutional life by diluting their and compromising their witness to the oppressed and witness to Jesus. So therefore, death and suffering is something that we need to wrestle with as we navigate and try to be disciples and followers of Jesus. And also we need to have a spirit of martyrdom, which is not necessarily only focusing on the suffering that comes from witness, but the empowerment that martyrdom gives you, that you are released from the fear of survival, and you create a movement that is very salty and very illuminating, salt and light. And it's not about numbers, it's not about the power that we have, because we're very much powerless. We're called for a different standard. The mission is the same, the mission irrespective of our numbers. So martyrdom is cultivating the spirit of witness in the face of great cost. I'll end by referencing John Sobrino, who we rely on a lot for our theology of martyrdom, is that liberation in politics makes your faith very relevant, right? It connects to the news of the day. Martyrdom makes your faith credible. And in the times of genocide and in the times of suffering, when you're tested, when you're on trial, there are not many people who have credibility. They might be relevant to the times of the news, but they're not credible. I think it was very clear to us that there were many credible voices, but also not so much credible voices. And that's why we wanted to speak about our own experiences of death and suffering and fear within that chapter, which is a subject that often doesn't get addressed in Palestinian theological circles.
Yeah, and also we have, some of our authors, specifically Yusuf Khoury, his family are still in Gaza. So when we commemorated about 2 to 3 weeks ago the bombing of the Orthodox Church in Gaza, which happened 2 years ago, his family were there, right? Or other authors have been under threat of being arrested, or or possibly beaten up, or worse, because of the stances they have taken, or being fired from a job, and so on and so forth. Or when I happened to be teaching a class during that time, and a lot of the students didn't want to speak about the subject I had prepared, because it was already about a month and a half into the genocide. They wanted to talk about martyrdom. This is what our communities are facing. These are the questions that they're facing. Do I stay in Palestine and face the consequences, or do I leave? And these are very, very difficult questions, and that's why we wanted to address it head on.
Yeah, I think there was the quote. It might be from Sabrino. I'm just going to look at it real fast. No, it was actually from the Patriarch Michael. I don't know his last name. Can you pronounce that for me?
Michel Sabah.
Thank you. Yes. And on page 134, you talk about the weight of witness, and you quote him saying, if there is plenty of salt, only a small quantity is needed to season the food. But if there is little of it, all is needed. Hence the earnestness of the task and the mission, and to be fulfilled by a community of faithful, which is not numerous, because the temptation to resign is great. So you alluded to the fact that there's 2% of Palestinian Christians remaining in Palestine, down from a lot more before the Nakba. And there's this temptation to want to survive, and that this chapter is a lot about the difference between those things. The church right now in North America is trying to make itself relevant, and maybe diluting some of its prophetic imagination and prophetic voice, right? So how? Let me go on. So it says that a Palestinian theology of martyrdom critiques the theology of survival, and that it takes it from preservation to active agency. And then my favorite, like, few lines of your book follows that, which just talks about the transformative power of martyrdom and what you're talking about. Can you speak to that, like, transformation? And because you talk about love and mercy in that, so can you expand on that idea?
Yeah, and I think this is relevant for not just the Palestinian church, but as you mentioned, for Christians in North America, but really all around the world, right? This is something that every single Christian encounters in their life on a daily basis, and we don't always succeed in it as well, including ourselves. And this is an idea that sometimes we pick the easier option. We pick the theology of survival in order to perhaps preserve our own lives, but sometimes we dilute the olive oil, our theology, our witness. And as Sam mentioned, when you commit yourself to being a true witness, regardless of the consequences, it liberates yourself. And being a martyr is not just one who is promoting and advancing justice and liberation, but also mercy and compassion and love. How can we all embrace this form of radical love that we see in the life and teaching of Jesus? And in some ways, again, to reference Cohn, it's this idea of ultimate success through failure. And so many churches are looking for success. But what we really need to look at is the life of Jesus and the cross, which is a failure. But it's a failure that then gets transformed into ultimate success. So this is sort of the push that we're making.
Yeah.
I'll add that we're also we're critiquing the Palestinian church here, right? Palestinian church, our numbers are dwindling. There's a certain year that they're predicting that there'll be no more Palestinian Christians left in Palestine. And what you hear a lot from the Palestinian church is that survival message. We want to preserve our numbers. We want to preserve our institutions. And that's not the right message. That's not the right mindset. The right mindset is let's do what Michel Sabah said. Let's put even more salt. Let's put even more light within our witness. And it's not about whether we are 1,000 or we're 2. It's about being the witness. And that's kind of the mindset that we want the church to be in, that kind of sense of martyrdom. So that's really the orientation that we wanted the church to be, because the church has been very, at times, passive or careful to seek its own survival. And therefore we wanted to create an energy, a mindset of agency, and that's where martyrdom really comes from. So that was kind of why we wanted to pick Michel Sabah, because when you read that quote, you're like, wow, it's you're energetic now. You want to do something, and that's the power of Christ being on the cross, because the lynching victim who is failing, the empire is succeeding in lynching them. This is where James Cone is powerful. The power that comes in the martyrdom is knowing that no one can take away the affirmation that they're human and that they're loved. And therefore, in a time of genocide, when you're thinking about death and suffering, although the empire can kill you and crucify you and muzzle you and silence or imprison you, they cannot take away your humanity. And when you look to the theology of survival, you take away that affirmation of humanity. And that's why martyrdom actually gives oppressed people power and strength to carry on, even though that they might be killed and might be silenced or imprisoned. And that's kind of the message I think the world needs to have, and the church needs to have, all in Palestine, but beyond.
Yeah. I mean, this relates to Samud, right? Forgive me if I'm saying that wrong. But can you explain that concept? Because it seems like those two things are related. You talk about dignity and the humanity and the agency of people. Can you explain that a little bit more for us?
Yes, sumud is a concept in it's from Arabic, which means steadfastness or resilience, but is really ingrained in Palestinians' consciousness and if I could say sort of spirituality, whether you're a Christian or you're a Muslim. And this is the idea that despite the oppression, despite the suffering, the restrictions, the freedom of movement, so on and so forth, you continue to affirm your humanity and those around you by doing acts of charity, of love. So this is not sort of a superhero type of steadfastness that nothing can hurt you, because we know that things can hurt you and they do hurt you and people are dying. But it's this idea that you can affirm your own humanity and others despite the context and the consequences of, this is a mother or a father who are feeding their 7 children despite having very, very, humble jobs. Or this is a neighbor who takes care of his other neighbor who is an elder, right? These are small acts of love that have a big impact and actually can speak to the resilience and even spirituality of an entire people. It means being hospitable, and for those who have been to Palestine, there's people with very little, but they will give everything for their guests, right? So it's this type of transforming power that I think the Palestinian people have. And we've recently been traveling in the US, and I saw the amount of homeless people on the streets. If you come to Palestine, despite our communities being much more poorer, we don't have a problem of homelessness because communities take care of those who are struggling. So that's sort of the idea of sumud.
Man, I don't want to give away all the book, but I want you to know that I have highlighted and underlined, so much in this book, and then have my just notes, copious amounts. And where can our friends buy this book if they wanted to get, where's the best place? I know you can get it off of Amazon. I know you can get it off of other places, but where would you recommend our friends buying your book?
Come to Palestine and buy it from John and I, personally. No. I think from Orbis, John, is that the right?
Yeah.
If you go to Orbis.
You can go directly to Orbis and purchase it, or if you're connected to a university, seminary, church, get them to buy it for the local library if you struggle with any finances. I think the introduction is free online on Orbis's website.
Okay.
That's also possible.
Also, Orbis, if they know that there's a church or a reading group who wants to buy a number of copies, they would be giving discounts in case you're. It's a bit of a financial cost, so maybe that could help.
Awesome. And I know that you guys have written a forthcoming article for the Sojo magazine during Advent time, and Mr. Isaac also wrote something, a few years ago about that too. Can you kind of, without giving the whole article away, can you kind of summarize what people can look forward to and what they're going to read?
Yeah. What we have wrestled with, and when I mean we, it's Palestinian Christians in general, in the Advent season and Christmas since October 7th, 2023, is that the Christmas story has come alive and has given us new meanings because the context of the Christmas story and Advent is one of massacres and of refugees and people trying to find a place of safety from a tyrant, people who are searching for hope, for a star, and finding it in Jerusalem rather than in Bethlehem. So that kind of, we wanted to outline in that article that we are, what is the true meaning of Christmas? What message is Christmas giving us and to whom. Christmas is not for everyone. And to take away that kind of capitalistic, superficial co-option of Christmas, but to center it on the true liberatory story of the incarnation of God amongst oppressed people. At that time, it was the Palestinian Jews under Roman occupation. So how can we celebrate it in an authentic manner? But also, what's interesting about the Christmas story, and it shows you the power of Mary as a prophet. Mary as a prophet was already foretelling the crucifixion of Christ and the wise men. So the stable is a place of food for the animals. And that is also foretelling the Last Supper of Christ and the disciples. The wise men bring certain gifts. One of them is myrrh, which is used for the burial of bodies. Why would you give that as a gift for someone who just got born? So it's already foretelling us that the incarnation and the liberation that is within the Christmas story is deeply connected to the crucifixion. And we should always keep that in mind as we celebrate Christmas. The incarnation with the foretelling of the crucifixion, the Easter story, and ultimately resurrection.
Yeah. You guys are still on book tour right now, or no? Okay. That ended a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
How long were you guys on tour for this book, if you don't mind me asking?
We were officially around 10 days of tour, and then we've spoken in other places, and now also on a few online places. And it's been an extreme privilege, not only to bring mine and Sam's voices, but the other 6 contributors who I recommend for all the listeners to look them up, because they're very, very impressive and faithful people, and also our community to a certain extent, those who are engaging. So it's been a privilege.
Yeah.
And the book tour was in collaboration with Friends of Sabeel North America. So if you're tuning in from the States or from Canada, whatever, I really recommend you to go and check out their website and their work that they do. They are the kind of the voice of Sabeel, which is a Palestinian Liberation Theology Center in Jerusalem, and they do fantastic work, including delegations to Palestine and action points in the U.S. So that was the collaboration with the book tour. So shout out to Sabeel North America.
Yeah, I had the privilege of talking with Jesse Wheeler, right? He's the director, and he kind of led me to you guys, as well as our own writer, Josiah. And so I was just really grateful for all these connections that put this book in my hands, and allowed me to kind of sift through, my perspective and then be challenged in so many ways. So I'm really grateful for you guys and your writing and your passion for this, and to help people, especially in the Western Church, understand more about what's happening, what has happened, not just in the last couple of years, but in the last century. So I'm really grateful for you both. We will put the FOSNA link for people to find, so they can look up Friends of Sabeel North America, as well as Orbis Books. And if you have any recommendations for us to, go deeper, then let us know. We'll post that as well for people to kind of track down. And I just really am grateful for you guys and your time. I know it's evening and late there, so I just appreciate you guys staying up a little bit later and helping us walk through this.
Of course, I want to say also thank you to Sojourners I've met different people in different positions in your organization, and I only have respect and really appreciate what you're doing, and I know that you're also doing it in tough times and in a tough context. So also, it's we're comrades, we're colleagues.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much, and we're in the struggle together. And this book is not necessarily asking for help. It's asking you to join us in the olive groves to pick olives. So we're in the struggle together, and these conversations are so important to have precisely because of the times. And our liberation and suffering is interconnected. So we really appreciate you. And for those tuning in, come say hello to John and I in Palestine, in Jerusalem. And yeah, ahlan wa sahlan.
Bye, friends. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into that. That was truly an incredible conversation, and I hope that you all got as many takeaways from that as I did. Please be sure to stay plugged in with them, get that book. I know that I will be reading it for sure, and follow us here at SojoAction with all the other incredible things we have going on. Thank you all so much for coming again. Have a fantastic rest of your day.